"Get out of here, you pathetic old woman. You're a nobody." Those were the words my own daughter, Clara, screamed at me on the day of her engagement party, in front of all her guests. She threw me out of her house as if I were trash. What she didn't know was that I, Eleanor, at 70 years old, had just sold my company for $34 million. But on that day, I decided to keep my mouth shut. I just said, "All right, honey," and I left without an argument. The next day, I moved to my chalet in Switzerland. 3 weeks later, she would be begging for my forgiveness. It all started when I arrived at her house for the celebration of her engagement to Julian. I brought an expensive gift, a genuine Tiffany pearl necklace I had bought on a trip to New York. I was excited to share this special moment with my only daughter, but from the moment I walked in, I noticed the disdainful glances. The guests whispered. Julian ignored me completely, and Clara acted as if my presence embarrassed her. "Mom, what are you doing here?" she asked me coldly when I approached to congratulate her. "I came to celebrate with you, sweetheart. It's your engagement." Clara looked me up and down, sizing up my simple brown dress, my worn-out shoes. She had no idea that beneath this humble appearance was a woman who could buy everything in that room without blinking. "Look, Mom," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is an elegant event with important people. You can't just show up dressed like the hired help and expect to fit in." Her words cut through me like knives. The guests began to snicker quietly. Julian walked over with a malicious grin. "Eleanor, I think it would be best if you left. This really isn't your scene." I remained calm, but inside, my heart was tearing apart. "I just wanted to give you this," I said, holding out the small blue box with the necklace. Clara took it without even opening it. "Thanks. But next time, check with me before you come. Not all events are for all people." The humiliation was complete. 40 people staring at me as if I were an intruder in my own daughter's life. But the worst was yet to come. Barbara, Julian's mother, approached with an air of superiority. "My dear Eleanor, I understand you want what's best for Clara, but you must realize that she is part of our family now, a family with a certain social standing. Perhaps it would be prudent for you to keep some distance." Her words were the last straw. Clara nodded in agreement with her future mother-in-law. "Mom, Barbara is right. I need you to understand your place. I'm not the little girl who depended on you anymore. I have a prosperous life now, a bright future, and frankly, your presence is an embarrassment." My world collapsed in that instant. I remembered all the years I worked to the point of exhaustion to give her the best education, the sacrifices I made so she would never lack for anything. I sold my first condo to pay for her Ivy League tuition. I gave up on relationships to dedicate myself completely to her, and now she was treating me like I was a burden. "An embarrassment?" I repeated, my voice trembling. The guests moved closer to better hear the spectacle. Clara put her hands on her hips, defiant. "Yes, Mom, an embarrassment. Look around you. These people are successful entrepreneurs, distinguished professionals. What do you bring to the table? What could you possibly talk to them about?" Julian chimed in with calculated cruelty. "Eleanor, let's be honest. You live in a rented apartment. You have no savings. You don't have a college degree. Clara deserves to be surrounded by people on her level." His words were like precisely aimed daggers, each syllable designed to publicly humiliate me. Barbara added her venom with feigned elegance. "It's not personal, dear. We simply believe Clara needs to focus on her new life without distractions from the past." The word distractions echoed in my ears like an emotional death sentence. Clara approached me, her eyes filled with contempt. "Mom, I'm going to say this clearly, so you understand once and for all. I don't want you to come to my wedding. I don't want you to be a part of my new life. You are the past, and that's where you need to stay." The silence in the room was deafening. 40 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, waiting for my reaction. I felt my soul shatter into 1,000 pieces, but something inside me, a voice that had been dormant for years, began to awaken. For the first time in my life, my daughter had crossed a line from which there was no return. In that moment, I decided I would never swallow my pride again. "All right, honey," I said with a calm that surprised even myself. "You're right. I'm no longer a part of your life." I picked up my purse, turned around, and walked toward the door. As I left, I heard the malicious laughter of the guests and their disparaging comments. "Poor old woman," someone said. "How pathetic," added another voice. That night, alone in my apartment, I made a decision that would change everything forever. That night, alone in my apartment, I cried as I hadn't cried in decades, but through the tears, something powerful awoke within me. A cold, calculated fury, a determination that had been dormant for too long. I went to my desk and opened the secret drawer where I kept the documents nobody knew about: bank statements, property deeds, investment certificates, $34 million waiting for my command. Clara had no idea who her mother truly was. To her, I was a poor, pathetic old woman, but the truth was very different. For 40 years, I had built a financial empire working in the shadows. While she was studying and having fun, I was investing every dollar I earned. Real estate in 3 countries, stocks in multinational corporations, high-yield investment funds, all under my name alone. At dawn, I called my lawyer, Arthur. "I need to see you urgently," I said. "It's time to activate the plan we prepared years ago." Arthur was the only one who knew my true financial situation. He had handled all my transactions, protected my assets, and kept the secret for decades. "Are you finally going to reveal your fortune?" he asked with curiosity. "Not exactly," I replied with a bitter smile. "I'm going to disappear for a while, but first I want Clara to learn a lesson she will never forget." Arthur understood immediately. He knew the whole story of my sacrifice for my daughter. He knew how much I had suffered in silence. That same morning, I packed only the essentials: 3 suitcases with simple clothes, some personal documents, and photographs of Clara when she was little. I left the rest exactly as it was. I wanted it to look like I had truly left as a defeated and humiliated woman, but the truth was very different. While I was packing, I remembered the day Clara was born. I was 30 years old, single, and decided to adopt her when no one else wanted her. The first few years were incredibly tough. I worked 3 jobs to support her. I studied at night to improve my professional skills. I gave up any social life to dedicate myself completely to her. Every dollar I earned was split in 2, half for our basic expenses, the other half for investments that would secure our future. Clara never knew she was adopted. I told her that her father had died when she was a baby. She never questioned the story, never asked for details. She simply accepted that we were a family of 2, and I dedicated myself, body and soul, to being the best mother I could be. Apparently, it wasn't enough. I called David, my trusted accountant. "I want you to transfer $5 million to the Swiss account immediately," I ordered, "and prepare the documentation to activate the European properties. I'm leaving for an indefinite period." David had worked with me for 20 years. He knew that when I made a decision, it was final. "What should I do if Clara asks about you?" he inquired. "Tell her that her mother was exactly what she thought. A woman with no resources who left in shame," I replied coldly. "But David, keep all my assets protected. I might need them soon." Before leaving, I wrote a letter that I wouldn't send right away. "Dear Clara, for 70 years I have lived for others, first for my parents, then for you. I never asked myself what I wanted for myself. Yesterday, you gave me the answer. I want dignity, I want respect, and if I can't have them with you, I will look for them elsewhere. Your mother, who is no longer a burden." End of quote. The car service arrived at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was a black Mercedes I had hired to take me directly to the private airport. But before leaving, I made one last call. "Julian," I said when he answered, surprised. "It's Eleanor. I just wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" he asked, confused. "For showing me who you really are, and for showing me who my daughter is when she's with you." I hung up before he could respond. The private jet was waiting for me on the tarmac. Destination: Zurich, Switzerland. My chalet in the Swiss Alps awaited me like a silent refuge where I could plan my next move. But before boarding, I made one more decision. I called Maria, Clara's housekeeper. "Maria, it's Eleanor. Can you do me a favor?" Maria had always been kind to me, unlike my own daughter. "Of course, Mrs. Eleanor. What do you need?" "I want you to watch everything that happens in that house for the next few weeks. If anything important happens, call me at this number." End. During the flight, I reviewed my bank accounts on my tablet, $34 million, strategically distributed around the world. Properties in Miami, London, and Paris, and of course, my beautiful chalet in Switzerland, where no one could find me until I decided to reappear. As the plane flew over the Atlantic, I smiled for the first time in years. Clara had gotten exactly what she wanted, to get rid of her embarrassing mother. But very soon, she would discover that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The chalet in Switzerland was exactly what I needed, a perfect refuge where no one could find me until I decided when and how to return. From the windows, I could see the snow-covered Alps, a landscape that calmed me and gave me mental clarity. I had bought this property 5 years ago as an investment, but now it was becoming my headquarters to plan what came next. I spent the first week resting and processing everything that had happened, but the second week, Maria called with news that ignited my fury once again. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said in a worried voice, "you need to know what's happening here. Clara is telling everyone that you left because you couldn't keep up with her lifestyle. She says you were a financial burden, and that's why you disappeared." "What else is she saying?" I asked, feeling the rage build in my chest. "She says you never had any savings, that you lived off loans, and that reality finally caught up with you. Julian is telling people at his office that his mother-in-law was a problematic woman who didn't know her place, and Barbara—" Maria paused. "Barbara is throwing a party to celebrate that you're gone." My hands trembled with indignation. Not only had they publicly humiliated me, but now they were destroying my reputation to make themselves look like the heroes of the story. Clara had turned my departure into her personal victory. That could not stand. That same night, I called Arthur. "I want you to investigate everything about Julian and his family. I need to know where their money comes from, what businesses they have, if they have debts, enemies, secrets, everything." Arthur was a brilliant lawyer with contacts everywhere. If there was anything to uncover about my son-in-law, he would find it. "I also want you to hire a private investigator," I continued. "I need photographs, videos, audio recordings. I want to document every move Clara and Julian make for the next few weeks. But be discreet. They can't know we're watching." 3 days later, Arthur called me with explosive information. "Eleanor, I found something very interesting about Julian. His company is on the verge of bankruptcy. He owes $3 million to several suppliers, and the bank is threatening to foreclose on his office. Apparently, he's been keeping up appearances with borrowed money." "Does Clara know any of this?" I asked, my curiosity growing. "According to my sources, she has no idea. Julian has been lying to her about his financial situation. In fact, he was counting on you leaving her some inheritance to save his business. That's why he was so upset when you left with nothing." The irony was delicious. Julian had despised me for supposedly being poor, when in reality, he was the one who was broke, and my daughter, who had thrown me out for being an embarrassment, was about to marry a man who couldn't even pay his own debts. But the most valuable piece of information came a week later. The private investigator sent me a video that would change everything. Julian was in a sleek restaurant with a young woman. It was clearly not a business meeting. They were kissing, holding hands, acting like lovers. The date of the video was after his engagement to Clara. "Perfect," I murmured as I watched the video for the 3rd time. "This is exactly what I needed." But before I used that information, I decided to run a test. I wanted to see just how far my daughter's cruelty would go. I called Clara from an unknown number, pretending to be a social worker. "Miss Clara, we're looking for your mother, Eleanor. We have some important documents for her." "My mother doesn't live here anymore," Clara responded coldly. "She left because she couldn't support herself. I suppose she's in some nursing home or something. I'm not responsible for her." Her words cut me like knives. She didn't even feign concern for my well-being. "Do you have a number where we can contact her? It's about a family inheritance," I pressed. Clara laughed cruelly. "Inheritance? My mother never had family with money. It must be a mistake. And even if it were true, she's no longer a part of my life. Look somewhere else." I hung up the phone with tears in my eyes, but also with a steely determination. My own daughter had signed her own sentence. Not only had she thrown me out of her life, but she was willing to deny me even the possibility of an inheritance. It was time for her to meet the real Eleanor. That night, from my study in the chalet, I began to design my revenge. First, I would investigate Julian's financial situation further. Second, I would use the video of his infidelity at the perfect moment. Third, I would return to the city when they least expected it, but not as the humiliated woman who had left. I would return as the powerful woman I truly was. I called David and gave him precise instructions. I want you to prepare all the documentation for my properties and investments. We're going to need to show irrefutable proof of my net worth very soon. Are you planning to reveal your fortune? He asked. Not just that, I replied with a smile he couldn't see. I'm going to give them the most expensive lesson of their lives. The plan was taking shape. Clara had wanted to get rid of her embarrassing mother. Very soon, she would discover that she had thrown away the only person who had ever truly loved her unconditionally. And when she realized her mistake, it would be too late for forgiveness. The 4th week in Switzerland brought news that fueled my thirst for justice even more. Maria called me, completely distraught. Mrs. Eleanor, you have to hear this. Clara is planning to sell the apartment where you lived. How is that possible? I asked, surprised. That apartment is in my name. She's telling everyone that you signed a power of attorney for her before you left, that you were so desperate you gave her everything so you wouldn't be a burden. My blood boiled. Not only had they invented lies about my departure, but now they were trying to steal my property. But Clara had made a fatal mistake. That apartment was just one of my smallest properties. I had intentionally kept it modest so that no one would suspect my true financial situation. Maria, I said, my voice calm but lethal, I need you to do something for me. Record every conversation you can when Clara talks about my supposed poverty, when she mentions the fake power of attorney, when she makes fun of me. Record everything. Maria understood the importance of my request immediately. That same afternoon, I called Arthur. Clara is trying to sell a property that doesn't belong to her using forged documents. I want you to initiate legal action immediately. Do you want me to sue her for fraud? My lawyer asked. Not yet. First, let her sink deeper into her lies. When she's completely exposed, then we'll strike. Meanwhile, the private investigator sent me more devastating information about Julian. Not only was he broke and had a mistress, but he had been using Clara's name to apply for loans without her knowledge. My daughter was about to marry a con man who would leave her in financial ruin. For a moment, I was tempted to warn her. Despite everything she had done to me, she was still my daughter. But I remembered her words. You're an embarrassment. I don't want you to be a part of my new life. She had made her choice. Now she would have to live with the consequences. The 5th week brought the lowest blow of all. Maria sent me an audio recording that shattered my soul. It was Clara talking with her friends at her bachelorette party. Is your mom not coming to the wedding? One of them asked. Thank God she's not, Clara replied between laughs. She finally realized she doesn't belong in my life. She was so pathetic, always trying to impress my friends with cheap gifts. Was she that bad? Another friend pressed. You have no idea, Clara continued cruelly. A 70-year-old woman who never had anything of her own, who lived in a fantasy world, pretending to be important. In the end, reality hit her, and she left with her tail between her legs. Julian says she's probably begging for money somewhere. The laughter of her friends echoed in my ears like poisoned daggers. My own daughter was celebrating my supposed misery. She was using my pain as entertainment for her guests. That night, I cried for the last time. By dawn, the sadness had transformed into something much more powerful, an implacable determination. I called Arthur with new instructions. I want you to rent the presidential suite at the most exclusive hotel in the city. I also need you to hire a discreet security team and a professional photographer. It's time to go back. Are you sure this is the right time? He asked. More than sure, I replied. It's time for Clara to meet her real mother. But before traveling, I had to make a special preparation. I called my personal stylist in Paris. I need a complete transformation. Hair, makeup, wardrobe. I want to look like the successful woman I truly am. I also hired a chauffeur with a brand new Mercedes and a small entourage to accompany me for a memorable entrance. The 6th week, While Clara was finalizing the details of her wedding, I was finalizing the details of my revenge. The private investigator confirmed that Julian had scheduled a meeting with Clara at a notary's office for the day after the wedding. Apparently, he was going to have her sign documents that would make her liable for all his debts. My daughter had no idea she was marrying her own financial ruin. "Are you going to warn her?" Arthur asked me when I showed him the evidence. "She made her choice when she threw me out of her life," I responded coldly. "Now she's going to learn that choices have consequences, and that the woman she despised was the only one who was truly protecting her." That night, from my desk in the chalet, I wrote 3 letters. One for Clara, which I would deliver at the perfect moment. One for Julian, which would be my declaration of war. And one for Barbara, who would pay dearly for her part in my humiliation. Every word was calculated to cause maximum emotional impact. The plan was complete. I would return 2 days before the wedding. I would check into the most luxurious hotel in the city and make a series of public appearances that would leave everyone speechless. Clara had wanted to get rid of her embarrassing mother. Very soon, she would find herself face to face with a woman who could buy and sell her entire new family without blinking. As I packed my finest jewelry and designer dresses, which I had kept hidden away for years, I smiled with anticipation. Little Clara, who had once called me Mommy with love, was about to discover that she had made the costliest mistake of her life. The return to the city was exactly as I had planned. Impactful, elegant, and completely unexpected. The black Mercedes pulled up in front of the Grand Palace Hotel, the most exclusive in the city, as an army of bellhops rushed to handle my luggage. I stepped out of the car, completely transformed. My hair was freshly cut and styled by the best stylist in Paris. I wore an elegant red dress that cost more than most people's annual salary, and authentic jewelry that sparkled under the hotel lights. The receptionist immediately recognized me as someone important, though she didn't know exactly who I was. "Welcome to the Grand Palace, madam. Your presidential suite is ready." As I rode the private elevator up, I could see the curious and admiring glances from the other guests. After 6 weeks of mourning my daughter, I finally felt like the powerful woman I truly was. That same afternoon, following my carefully designed plan, I decided to make my first public appearance. I knew perfectly well the places Clara and her social circle frequented. My first stop was the most exclusive boutique in the city, where I knew Barbara went regularly. It was time for the woman who had called me a distraction from the past to meet my true self. I entered the boutique like a quiet storm. The salespeople approached immediately, recognizing a high-powered client in my appearance. "How may we help you, madam?" the manager asked with a servile smile. "I want to see your most exclusive collection," I replied with authority. "Price is not an issue." As I browsed designer dresses that cost thousands of dollars, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Eleanor?" It was Barbara, her eyes wide, clearly unable to believe what she was seeing. I turned around slowly, a calculated smile on my lips. "Barbara," I said with an icy calm. "What a surprise to see you here." But you left," she stammered in confusion. "Weren't you supposed to be—" "Supposed to be what?" I interrupted elegantly. "Begging on a street corner? Living in a nursing home? Starving?" Her cheeks flushed with shame as she realized I had heard all the lies they had been spreading. At that moment, the saleswoman approached with 3 very expensive dresses. "Madam, these are our most exclusive models. This Valentino is $8,000, this Versace is $10,000, and this limited edition Chanel is $15,000. Without blinking, I pointed to all 3. "I'll take them all. And I'd also like to see your jewelry collection." Barbara was paralyzed, watching me spend more money in 5 minutes than she saw in a year. "I don't understand," she murmured. "Clara said you had no money, that you were a financial burden." My dear Barbara," I replied, trying on a $20,000 diamond necklace. "It seems my daughter doesn't know her mother as well as she thought." "But the modest apartment, the simple clothes?" Barbara insisted, trying to make sense of it. "That's called discretion," I explained with condescending patience. "Some of us need to make sure we are loved for who we are, not for what we have." Apparently, I failed that test with my own daughter. The boutique manager returned with a tray of jewels that glittered like stars. "Which do you prefer, madam?" I chose a diamond necklace, bracelet, and earring set for $35,000. This is perfect. Charge it all to my black card. When I took out the credit card with no limit, Barbara nearly fainted. Barbara, I said as I signed for the purchase, I want you to give Clara a message for me. Tell her that her embarrassing mother is back, and also tell her that on her wedding day, she's going to receive a surprise she will never forget. Are you going to the wedding? She asked, her voice trembling. Oh no, I replied with a devilish smile. She was very clear that I wasn't welcome, but that doesn't mean I can't send a gift. I left the boutique, leaving Barbara completely confused and terrified. I knew that in less than an hour, Clara would receive a hysterical phone call telling her about our encounter. It was exactly what I wanted. For her to know I was back, but not to know my intentions. That night, from my presidential suite, I called David. Are all the documents ready? Completely, he replied. The property deeds, the bank statements, the audio recordings, the private investigator's photographs. Everything is organized chronologically for maximum impact. Perfect. Tomorrow is the wedding day. It's time for Clara to learn who her mother really is. Endo. But before sleeping, I had one more call to make. I dialed Maria's number. Maria, how are things at the house? I asked. Mrs. Eleanor, they are all hysterical. Barbara came running to tell Clara about the encounter at the boutique. Clara is furious and confused. Julian is nervous. No one understands how you can afford to spend so much money. Have they said anything about canceling the wedding? No, ma'am, but they're arguing a lot. Clara screamed at Barbara that she had lied about you, and Barbara insists she didn't understand anything. The information was music to my ears. The chaos had begun, and tomorrow would be just the first act of a play that would have a devastating ending for everyone who had betrayed me. As I looked at the city lights from my window, I thought of the little girl who once hugged me and told me I was the best mom in the world. That girl had disappeared, replaced by a cruel woman who had thrown me out like trash. Tomorrow, that woman would pay the price for her ingratitude. The wedding day dawned perfectly for my plans. While Clara was preparing for what she thought would be the happiest day of her life, I was finalizing the details of what would become her worst nightmare. From my presidential suite, I coordinated every move like a general preparing for a decisive battle. The war had begun, and I had all the weapons. My first action was to send a special gift to the church, a spectacular floral arrangement of white orchids with a card that read, "For Clara, on the most important day of her life. With love, the mother who is no longer a burden." I knew those words would make her nervous, but that was just the appetizer for what was to come. While Clara was getting dressed in her room, I was preparing for my grand entrance. The dress I had chosen was a work of art, an elegant black Armani that cost more than the total budget of her wedding. The jewelry that complemented the outfit was worth as much as a house. Every detail was calculated to show power, elegance, and reclaimed dignity. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, once the ceremony had already begun, I launched the second phase of my plan. I called Arthur. "It's time for the press conference," I said. "Are you sure?" he asked. "After this, there's no going back." "I'm more than sure," I replied. "It's time for the entire city to know the truth about Clara's perfect family." The press conference was held in the hotel's main ballroom at the exact same time as the religious ceremony. Journalists from all the major media outlets had arrived, drawn by the promise of an explosive revelation about one of the most talked-about weddings of the social season. When I entered the room, the silence was absolute. My transformation was so radical that many didn't recognize me at first. "My name is Eleanor," I began, my voice firm and clear, "and I am the mother of Clara, the bride who is at this moment getting married at St. Anthony's Church. I am here to clear up some lies that have been spread about me." The camera flashes began to go off as the journalists realized they had an explosive story on their hands. For the past few weeks, my daughter has been telling everyone that her mother was a poor woman with no resources, who left in shame because she couldn't support herself financially. I paused dramatically as I displayed the first documents. The truth is very different. I am the owner of a business empire valued at $34 million. The murmur in the room turned into a roar of surprise. Journalists surged forward to photograph the documents I was holding up. Property deeds in 3 countries, bank account statements, investment certificates, all authentic, all verifiable. all completely devastating to the version of the story Clara had been telling. My daughter threw me out of her life because she was embarrassed to have a mother who, according to her, didn't have the proper social status. I continued, my voice calm, but filled with pain. What she didn't know is that all the money she has spent on this lavish wedding, all the education she received, all the luxuries she has enjoyed throughout her life, were financed by the company I built by working day and night for 40 years. At that moment, Arthur approached the microphone with more explosive documents. We have evidence that Miss Clara has been attempting to sell properties that do not belong to her using falsified documents. We also have recordings where she mocks her mother's supposed poverty and celebrates her departure as a liberation. He played one of the audio files Maria had recorded. Clara's voice echoed through the ballroom. Thank God she's gone. She was so pathetic, always trying to impress with cheap gifts. Julian says she's probably begging for money somewhere. The silence that followed was deafening. But there's more, I continued, knowing the final blow would be devastating. My future son-in-law, Julian, is not only completely bankrupt, but he has been using my daughter's name to secure millions in loans that she is unaware of. I have evidence that tomorrow, after the honeymoon, he plans to have her sign documents that will make her liable for debts of over $5 million. The journalists erupted in a flurry of questions. Why are you revealing this now? One shouted. Because a mother can forgive ingratitude, but she cannot allow her daughter to be scammed and financially destroyed by a man who only sees her as his financial lifeline. I answered with dignity. Are you going to reconcile with your daughter? Another journalist asked. My daughter made her choice when she threw me out of her life, calling me a pathetic nobody. Now she will have to live with the consequences of having thrown away the only person who truly loved her unconditionally. At that precise moment, my phone rang. It was Maria, calling from the church. Mrs. Eleanor, she said in an agitated voice. It's chaos here. Someone tipped them off about the press conference. Clara is hysterical. Julian is as pale as a ghost, and the guests are leaving the church to watch the news on their phones. Did they get married? I asked curiously. Yes, but the reception has been cancelled. Clara is screaming that she wants to talk to you immediately. Tell her she knows where to find me, I replied before hanging up. The press conference ended with a final statement that I knew would be a headline in every newspaper. To all the mothers watching this, love, but never allow that love to become self-destruction. And to ungrateful children, remember that the parents who raised you with sacrifice deserve respect, not humiliation. As I left the ballroom amidst applause and camera flashes, I smiled with satisfaction. The first part of my revenge was complete. Clara had wanted a perfect wedding without her embarrassing mother. What she got was a ruined wedding and a public scandal that would haunt her for the rest of her life. I didn't have to wait long for the confrontation. 2 hours after the press conference, Clara burst into my presidential suite like a furious storm. She had managed to convince hotel security that she was my daughter, and she was, though at that moment, I wished she weren't. She entered without knocking, still in her wedding dress, but her makeup was streaked with tears of rage and humiliation. How could you do this to me? She screamed from the doorway. You ruined my wedding. You destroyed the most important day of my life. I was sitting calmly on the suite's sofa, sipping tea as if nothing had happened. Hello, Clara, I said with icy tranquility. You look beautiful, though a bit distraught. How was the ceremony? Don't you dare be cynical with me, she yelled, approaching with clenched fists. All the guests left. The newspapers are publishing everything. My reputation is destroyed. How curious, I replied, unruffled. A few weeks ago, you told me the exact same thing, that I was an embarrassment, that I was ruining your reputation, that you didn't want me to be part of your life. That was different. Different? How? I interrupted, standing up for the first time. Different because when you humiliated me in front of 40 people, it was okay, but when I tell the truth in front of 40 journalists, it's wrong? My voice remained calm, but my eyes burned with a fury that had been contained for decades. Clara was speechless for a moment, processing that for the first time in her life, her mother wasn't apologizing or begging for forgiveness. You're my mother, she finally said, as if that explained everything. You're supposed to protect me, not betray me. Exactly, I replied with a bitter smile. I am your mother, and for 30 years I protected you. I sacrificed everything for you. I gave up my own happiness for yours. And how did you repay me? By throwing me out like trash. But the money, she screamed desperately. Why did you never tell me you had money? Because I wanted you to love me for who I was, not for what I had, I answered with genuine sadness. I wanted to be sure that our love was real, not bought. Apparently, I was wrong on both counts. At that moment, Julian appeared in the doorway, sweating, and with a look of total panic. Eleanor, he said in a trembling voice, we need to talk. This is all a giant misunderstanding. Ah, the groom, I said with sarcasm. The man who told me this wasn't my scene, who suggested I leave because I was a burden to my own daughter. I didn't know, he started to stammer. You didn't know I had money. True, I interrupted. But you did know you were broke. You did know you had a mistress. And you did know you planned to use my daughter to save your bankrupt business. Julian turned white as a sheet. What are you talking about? I took out my phone and played the video from the private investigator. Julian passionately kissing another woman in the sleek restaurant. Do you recognize this woman? I asked coldly. Because according to my research, you've been sleeping with her throughout your entire relationship with Clara. Clara turned to her brand new husband, her eyes wide with disbelief. Is it true? She asked in a broken voice. Julian tried to deny it, but I continued with the evidence. I also have here the documents you plan to have her sign tomorrow, contracts that would make her liable for your $5 million in debt. That's a lie, Julian shouted desperately. Those are forged documents. Forged? I asked with a devilish smile. Arthur, please come in. My lawyer appeared at the door with a folder full of papers. Julian, Arthur said in a professional tone, these documents were obtained directly from your notary. They are fully authenticated. Clara collapsed into a chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had done. Not only had she thrown out her millionaire mother, but she had married a con man who planned to ruin her financially. It can't be, she murmured over and over. This can't be happening. Oh, but there's more, I continued mercilessly. Julian, tell your wife about the loans you've taken out using her name as collateral. Tell her about the mortgage you took out on the condo she thinks is hers. Tell her about the debts to loan sharks you have to pay by the end of the month. Oh, Julian fell silent, his silence confirming every one of my accusations. Clara looked at him with growing horror. Is it all true? She asked. Everything my mother said is true? Clara, I can explain, he began, but she cut him off with a slap that echoed throughout the suite. You used me, she screamed. You lied to me. I married a liar and a con man. How did you marry a man who despised your mother? I added calmly. Decisions have consequences, my dear daughter, and you chose to believe him instead of defending me. Clara turned to me, tears of desperation streaming down her face. Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Forgive me, please. Can we fix this? Can we? I asked with genuine curiosity. Like when I begged you not to throw me out of your life. Like when I pleaded with you to let me be at your wedding. Do you remember what you told me? You are no longer part of my life. You are the past, and that's where you need to stay. I didn't know, she cried desperately. I didn't know you had money. And there's the problem, I replied with infinite sadness. Your love for me depended on my bank account. When you thought I was poor, you threw me away. Now that you know I'm rich, you want me back. That isn't love, Clara. That's convenience. The silence that followed was devastating. For the first time in her life, Clara was facing the real consequences of her actions. She had lost her mother, she had married a con man, and her reputation was publicly destroyed, all for choosing money and status over unconditional love. Clara sat in the chair for several minutes, processing the complete devastation of her life. Julian had tried to escape, but Arthur had discreetly called hotel security and the police. Charges of fraud and document forgery were already being processed. My revenge was more perfect than I had ever imagined, but it wasn't over yet. Mom, Clara finally said in a broken voice, I know I was wrong. I know I was terrible to you, but you're my mother. You have to help me. I'm ruined. I have to help you, I repeated with irony. Like you helped me when you threw me out of your life? Like you helped me when you called me a pathetic nobody? But I'm your daughter, she cried desperately. Mothers are supposed to love their children unconditionally. You're right, I answered with deadly calm. Mothers do love unconditionally. I loved you for 30 years without asking for anything in return. I gave you everything I had. I sacrificed my own happiness. I gave up relationships to dedicate myself completely to you. And when I needed you most, when I needed your love and support, you threw me out like trash. At that moment, my phone rang. It was the private investigator with fresh news. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, "Julian just tried to empty the joint bank account he has with your daughter. He transferred all the money to an account in the Cayman Islands. The information was the final nail in the coffin. Your husband just stole all of your savings," I informed Clara. "He transferred them to an offshore account 10 minutes ago." Clara turned a shade of green. "What?" "Yes, dear. The man you chose over your mother, the man for whom you publicly humiliated me, just left you without a penny." Julian, who had been silent, waiting for a chance to escape, finally exploded. "This is your fault," he screamed, pointing his finger at me. "Everything was perfect until you showed up with your lies." "My lies?" I asked with a cold laugh. "Which part was a lie? The $34 million? Your bankruptcy? Your mistress? The forged documents? Everything I said has verifiable proof. You ruined my life." "No," I replied with absolute authority. "You ruined your own life when you decided to scam my daughter. I just made sure you paid the price for your decisions." At that moment, the police entered the suite to arrest Julian. The charges included fraud, document forgery, and identity theft. As they led Julian away in handcuffs, he yelled at Clara, "This isn't over. You're going to pay for all the money I lost because of you." His true colors finally showed. Clara realized she had married a man who not only didn't love her, but blamed her for his own crimes. "Mom," Clara said to me when we were alone, "I understand you're angry. I understand you want to punish me. But please don't leave me like this. I have no one else." "You have Barbara," I replied sarcastically, "the woman who told me to keep my distance because I didn't have the right social status. I'm sure she'll help you now that you're the daughter-in-law of a criminal." "Barbara has already turned her back on me," Clara admitted with shame. "When she heard about the scandal, she told me her family couldn't be associated with me. She forbade me from ever coming to her house again." "What a surprise," I said, showing no compassion. "It turns out your new family abandons you at the first sign of trouble, unlike your mother, who put up with 30 years of ingratitude and only left when you threw her out." Just then, Maria arrived with more devastating news. "Miss Clara," she said with genuine pity, "Julian's creditors have already been to the house. They took everything, the furniture, the television, the computer, even your wedding dress. They say they have a legal right because you signed as a guarantor without knowing it." Clara completely fell apart. In less than 4 hours, she had lost her husband, her money, her belongings, her reputation, and her political family. "What am I going to do?" she whispered in a state of shock. "I have nothing. I have no one. Now you know exactly how I felt when you threw me out of your life," I said without a hint of sympathy. "The difference is, I was 70 years old and had dedicated 30 years of my life to loving you unconditionally. You are 30 years old and have just learned that decisions have consequences. Is there nothing I can do to make you forgive me?" she asked in desperation. "Any way to win back your love?" "My love was never lost," I replied with genuine sadness. "But my respect, my trust, and my willingness to be your victim that was lost forever. So, what's going to happen to me?" "You are going to learn to live alone, just as I had to when you threw me out," I said, standing up to signal that the conversation was over. "You're going to get a job. You're going to pay your own bills. You're going to face the consequences of choosing money and status over real love." "But Mom—" "I'm not your mom anymore," I interrupted with final firmness. "You said it yourself. I'm no longer part of your life. Your mother was a woman who sacrificed for you without asking for anything in return. That woman died the day you called me a pathetic nobody and threw me out of your life. I am Eleanor, a successful woman who does not tolerate disrespect." Clara left my suite crying, finally understanding that she had lost the most valuable thing she ever had, the unconditional love of her mother, but it was too late for regret. Some wounds don't heal, and some words can't be taken back. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with the consequences for the rest of her life. 6 months later, my life had found a peace I never thought possible. From my beautiful chalet in Switzerland, I could watch the snow-covered mountains while sipping my morning coffee. The tranquility was absolute, interrupted only by the chirping of birds and the sound of the wind in the trees. For the first time in 70 years, I was living solely for myself. Maria visited me once a month to bring news from the city. Clara had found a job as a receptionist at a dental clinic, earning just enough to rent a small apartment in a modest neighborhood. Julian had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. Barbara had lost her social standing when it was revealed she had been covering up her son's crimes. Clara asks about you, Maria mentioned during her last visit. Every day, I replied with indifference. But she's no longer my problem. She chose her path when she threw me out of her life. Now she must walk it alone. Maria nodded in understanding, though I could see in her eyes that a part of her felt sorry for my daughter. Justice had been complete and devastating. The media had followed the story for months, turning it into a symbol of filial ingratitude and its consequences. Clara had lost not only her social status but also most of her friends, who had abandoned her when the scandal reached national proportions. Arthur called me weekly to update me on the legal proceedings. Julian appealed the sentence, but it was rejected, he informed me during our last conversation. He also tried to sue Clara for emotional damages, but the judge dismissed the lawsuit as ridiculous. What a pathetic man, I commented without surprise. Even in prison, he continues to blame others for his own crimes. Have you thought about contacting Clara? Arthur asked cautiously. David tells me she's been asking about you at the bank, trying to figure out how to send you a letter. No, I responded with absolute firmness. That woman died for me the day she called me pathetic. If she wants to communicate with me, she can use official channels like any other stranger. But Arthur's question made me reflect for days. Did I miss my daughter? The answer was complex. I missed the little girl she once was, the teenager who would hug me when she had nightmares, the young woman who called me her best friend. But the cruel woman who had thrown me out like trash? I didn't miss her at all. One afternoon, while organizing my family photographs, I found a letter Clara had written to me when she was 8 years old. Dear Mommy, it said in childish handwriting, you are the best mom in the world. When I grow up, I want to be just like you, strong, hardworking, and loving. I love you more than all the stars and the moon put together. Tears stream down my cheeks as I read those innocent words. That night, I wrote in my journal, the little girl who wrote that letter would have defended her mother against anyone. She would have valued sacrifice and love over money and status. But that little girl grew up and became a woman who chose cruelty over compassion. I cannot forgive the woman out of love for the little girl she once was. David visited me in the fall with financial news and something more. Eleanor, he said hesitantly, Clara tried to contact me. She wants to know if there's any chance of reconciliation. She says she completely understands what she did wrong and is willing to do anything to win back your love. Anything? I asked with irony. Does that include traveling back in time to not have called me pathetic? She's destroyed, David insisted. Physically, emotionally, financially. She's lost weight. She looks 10 years older, and according to Maria, she cries every day. Good, I replied with a coldness that surprised even me. Now she knows exactly how I felt for 6 weeks when I thought I had lost my only daughter to ingratitude. I spent the first anniversary of my departure in Paris, buying art for my new private gallery. As I walked through the Louvre, I thought about all the times I had dreamed of traveling, but had given up those dreams to pay for Clara's education. Now I was 71 years old, a multimillionaire, and I could finally do everything I had postponed for the sake of being a mother. That night, from my suite at the Ritz Hotel, I called Maria for the monthly news. Mrs. Eleanor, she said in a sad voice. Clara collapsed at work last week. They took her to the hospital for malnutrition and stress. The doctors said her emotional state is critical. And? I asked, without changing my tone. It was predictable. Cruel decisions have cruel consequences. She asks every day if you will ever forgive her, Maria insisted. She says she would rather be dead than live knowing she lost her mother forever. She should have thought of that before she threw me out like trash, I responded with the same coldness. I also would have preferred to be dead for weeks after her betrayal. The difference is, I didn't deserve that pain. After hanging up, I went to my suite's balcony and looked out at the lights of Paris, the city of love, the irony of life. I had found peace, prosperity, and dignity, but I had lost forever the illusion of a daughter's unconditional love. It was a high price, but it was the price Clara had put on our relationship when she chose to humiliate me publicly. My final reflection came as I was writing the last lines of my memoir. I don't regret adopting her when no one else wanted her. I don't regret sacrificing 30 years of my life for her happiness. I only regret not understanding sooner that kindness should never be practiced at the cost of self-destruction. Unconditional love does not mean accepting unconditional abuse. I closed the book of my memoirs and locked it in the safe. The story was over. Eleanor, the sacrificed and humiliated mother, was dead. In her place was born Eleanor, the free, prosperous, and self-possessed woman, and for the first time in 71 years, that was more than enough. 5 years had passed since that day that changed my life forever. Now at 75, I found myself on the terrace of my new villa on the French Riviera, watching the sunset over the Mediterranean. The peace I had found was so profound that sometimes it was hard to remember the broken woman I once was. The pain had transformed into wisdom, and the betrayal into liberation. My life had flourished in ways I never imagined possible. The art gallery I opened in Monte Carlo had become one of the most prestigious in Europe. My investments had grown to $50 million. But more important than material wealth was the emotional richness I had discovered, the satisfaction of living for myself for the first time in my life. Arthur visited me every 3 months, not just as my lawyer, but as the loyal friend he had been for decades. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had reacted differently?" he asked during his last visit. "If you had forgiven her immediately and continued being the ever-sacrificing mother?" "Every day," I answered honestly, "and every day I come to the same conclusion. I would have died inside. I would have continued to be the victim of my own kindness, teaching Clara that she could mistreat me without consequence. In the end, I did her a favor by teaching her that actions have a price." Maria had stopped visiting after the 3rd year. The news about Clara had become too painful for both of us. The last I heard was that she had attempted suicide twice, had lost several jobs due to depression, and was living practically like a vagrant in a tiny studio apartment. The guilt was literally consuming her. "Don't you feel any compassion for her?" Maria had asked during our last conversation. "All the compassion in the world," I replied. "But compassion doesn't erase the damage done. I spent 70 years feeling compassion for everyone except myself. It was time to change that dynamic." One spring afternoon, while organizing my mail, I found a letter that had arrived weeks ago, but which my assistant had set aside per my instructions. It was from Clara. The shaky handwriting revealed the emotional state of the writer. I opened it for the first time in 5 years, more out of curiosity than nostalgia. "Dear Mom," it began. "I know I have no right to write to you after everything I did. I know I lost the privilege of calling you that forever, but I need you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret every cruel word I said to you. I understand if you hate me. I hate myself too." I continued reading with a mixture of sadness and coldness. "I have lost everything. My marriage, my money, my friends, my health, my dignity. But the worst part is having lost your love. I would rather have poverty and loneliness than live knowing that I destroyed the purest and most valuable relationship in my life. I'm not asking for your forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that your daughter died the day she called you a pathetic nobody." The last lines shook me. "If you ever feel curious to know what became of the little girl who once loved you more than her own life, look for me in the cemetery, because the woman who betrayed you can no longer live with the weight of what she did. I love you, Mom. Forgive me in the next life." For the first time in 5 years, I felt something akin to panic. I called Arthur immediately. "I need you to find Clara urgently," I said, my voice trembling. "I think she's going to hurt herself." "Do you want me to help her?" he asked, surprised. "No," I replied after a long pause. "I want you to make sure she receives professional psychological care, but anonymously." I couldn't sleep that night. The letter had awakened something I thought was completely dead, the maternal instinct. Not a loving feeling toward the woman who had betrayed me, but compassion for a human being who was suffering the consequences of her own decisions. It was the difference between love and pity. Arthur called me 2 days later. We found her in time, he informed me. She was in the hospital after another attempt. We've transferred her to an excellent private psychiatric clinic. The costs are covered by an anonymous donation, as you requested. Will she recover? I asked. The doctors are optimistic, but they say she needs years of intensive therapy. She desperately wants to see you, but I explained that the anonymous benefactor prefers to remain secret. Good, I replied with relief. I'm not ready for that, and I may never be. 6 months later, Arthur brought encouraging news. Clara is responding well to the treatment. She has accepted full responsibility for the destruction of her life. She doesn't blame anyone else, not even Julian. The psychologists say it's the first step toward a real recovery. She has asked about me only once, when they told her someone was paying for her treatment. She asked if it was you. When they told her they couldn't reveal that information, she replied, "It doesn't matter who it is. My mother already did enough for me for 30 years. I have to get through this alone." Her words reached my soul. For the first time in 5 years, Clara was showing the maturity and humility I had always hoped for. But it was too late for reconciliation. The damage had been too deep, and I had built a new life where there was no longer room for the pain of the past. A year later, I received news that Clara had been discharged. She had gotten a job as a volunteer at a rehabilitation center for addicts, helping others who had hit rock bottom like she had. According to reports, she was a dedicated worker who never spoke of her past but had a special compassion for those who had lost their families due to their own actions. "Are you ever going to contact her?" Arthur asked me during one of our dinners. "No," I replied with absolute certainty. She learned her lesson. I learned mine. We are 2 different women now. The love that once bound us died with the words she said to me that day. As I write these final lines in my journal, at 76 years old, I can honestly say that I regret nothing. Not loving unconditionally for 30 years, nor cutting off that love when it became self-destructive. I learned that forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation, and that sometimes loving someone means letting them go forever. Clara and I now live in parallel worlds. She is rebuilding her life from the ashes of her mistakes. I am enjoying the life I have left, free from the emotional burdens of the past. We had both learned valuable lessons. She, that words have the power to destroy forever. I, that it is never too late to choose oneself. The maternal love had not completely died. It had just transformed into something wiser, the ability to love from a distance, without allowing that love to become vulnerability again. In the end, the best lesson I could give my daughter was to teach her that even the purest love has boundaries that cannot be crossed without permanent consequences.